Thank you. So in case any of you are disinclined to listen carefully to me because you don't know who I am and you've never heard of my company, I'm going to tell you immediately prior to this, I was at Taco Bell where I did your jobs. So I was the Chief Development Officer at Taco Bell, where we built about 1,000 restaurants, contributing over $1 billion to the brand and system sales. And the thing I was probably most proud of there was that we figured out how to attack the urban environment, which was something that previously Taco Bell had not known how to do and was pretty challenging. There's now almost 50 urban Taco Bell stores out there, the cantinas that you might read about in the news. And that was pretty fun. That was like working at a startup. And I left all of that fun stuff to go to a place called Kitchen United that no one's ever heard of. At the time, they had 3 employees, and then also Dana hanging out, who's now an official employee. We have a lot more employees now and a lot more locations. But why did I do that? Why did I go from a huge brand to a tiny little startup? And the reason was because I met someone who showed me the future. When I was at Taco Bell, I had wanted to enter Manhattan via a virtual restaurant, or ghost kitchen, as some of you might call them, and Kitchen United didn't exist. There was no way to do it. And so when Atul, who's on our team, introduced me to this concept, I walked in and I thought, oh my gosh, they're making the thing that I wanted, and here I am. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this incredible rise in off-premise demand. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about digital delivery platforms. So my prior life to working in development, I was a consultant, so I like graphs a lot. This particular one is the S-curve adoption model. For any of you who read Malcolm Gladwell, this probably looks pretty familiar. But basically what this says is that there are some people who come into a trend early. Those are your innovators and your early adopters. And there's some people who come to it late. And when you see the dramatic growth is kind of when you're shifting into that takeoff mode. And I would argue that's where we are today in delivery. So last year, when I joined Kitchen United, excluding pizza and Chinese, the digital delivery platforms accounted for about 5% of total restaurant sales. So way down there in the far left-hand corner of that red line. When you look at advanced countries, places like the Middle East, Asia, and even some places in Western Europe, that number is something like 30 to 70% of sales. So to go from somewhere between 5% to somewhere between 30 and 70%, you're talking about pretty enormous growth, right? And I recently read a stat. Did you guys see in the McDonald's earnings release, they said that it took 20 years to build $1 billion delivery business in the Middle East and Asia, which were the places that were a little ahead on this trend of adoption. And in the last 2 years, it's become a $3 billion business for them globally, right? So 20 years to get to $1 billion, 2 years to get to 3. That's astounding, and this growth is not going to go away. It's just going to keep building and building and building as additional groups adopt this behavior. Cowen and the NPD group now 2 years ago forecasted that growth in what they call digital channels. So that, again, this is the light gray is kind of old school phone deliveries, and the dark gray is the new school digital channels. Will just continue to grow and grow. We've actually already beat these numbers for both last year and this year. So it's becoming a very big part of all of your businesses. And the bummer thing is that digital restaurant demand can kind of feel like it's happening to the restaurant, right? Traditional restaurants were not designed to handle all of this off-premise growth. So even if it's mobile order ahead and takeout, digital delivery, catering, the restaurant was designed for a dine-in consumer experience. First of all, driver parking. This is actually your problem. You design restaurants, you build restaurants, driver parking is your problem. And you might be thinking, it is not my problem. They are not even the employees of Uber Eats. They are contractors. Why should I have to worry about them? And the reason why it's your problem is because a driver has 3 choices if you don't deal with their parking for them. The first one is they can pay for parking, and that eats up about 10% of their hourly earnings. The second one is they can park illegally and risk getting a ticket, which will blow up their entire day of earnings. Third one is they can circle around hoping to get lucky. And what happens while they're circling around? Your food is sitting there waiting for them, degrading, 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 getting worse. And by the time it gets to the consumer does not think to themselves, man, my driver must have really had a tough time parking today. No, they think, why did that restaurant give me cold food that's kind of congealed and gross, right? So this is something that you need to be thinking about as you're putting together your restaurants, designing your restaurants, and figuring out how you are going to handle this demand, because it is not going away. Order accuracy is also your problem. This is one of my favorite restaurants in Orange County. Stephen probably recognizes the bags. They have, and this was actually a pretty late evening, just a lineup of bags going out the door. Their sales are probably about 30% takeout, delivery, catering now. And it's very confusing to try to find the right order. I went in to pick up my order the night that I took this picture, and they were, double, triple checking, trying to find out which one was mine. I had ordered ahead online. And again, so a driver comes in, and you would think it's his job to make sure he has the right order, right? Ideally. But again, when that consumer gets the wrong thing, are they going to think, man, my driver screwed up my order? No, they're going to think the restaurant screwed up my order. I got the wrong thing. So you need to be thoughtful about order matching. You need to take into account how you are figuring out which orders go to which people, because the consumer is going to think of you. Drivers crowding out your dine-in customer is your problem. So this is a picture in Asia where, again, digital delivery platforms are much higher than they are here in the US today. And these are all just drivers waiting for orders. So how's a consumer supposed to walk into this restaurant, place an order, and get something? They can't. They can't even get to the register, right? So being thoughtful about where to put the drivers, critical. Dining customers watching someone else's order get made is your problem, right? So I might have thought that I got there first, placed my order, but someone else's order may have come in online through a mobile or digital platform, and I'm standing there waiting for my order. I'm in the restaurant. That other person's not there, but because their order came in first, it's being produced in front of me, and I have to watch it while I wait for mine. So this is either a huge opportunity or a terrible, terrible problem. Right now, for most of us, it's a terrible problem because our restaurants weren't designed to handle this. But remember, if we go from 5% penetration today to 50% penetration, which would be that average between 30 and 70, that's 10x growth. So whatever's going on today that you're already struggling with is going to get 10 times worse. And if you don't figure out a way to take advantage of that growth, it's definitely going to feel like it's happening to you, and your restaurants are going to be chaotic. So let's look at some of the things that restaurants are doing to address this so far. One thing folks are testing is a dedicated pickup zone. So here they're actually separating out where the consumer is coming in and ordering and picking up versus where either a digital order ahead consumers coming in to pick up or delivery drivers coming in to pick up. I think this is a pretty good approach. It's certainly better than having everyone cluster together. The challenge of it is that it does require some repeat visits from the order ahead folks or the drivers, because it tends to be, of course, off to the side on purpose. And so the first time someone comes to use it, they're highly likely to go toward the order point to engage in what they consider, the traditional behavior in the restaurant, and they have to be instructed to go around. And so it's not until they've visited that particular restaurant several times that they start to understand it. Restaurants are also starting to look at shelves. Sweetgreen talked about this a little bit today. So to me, it looks like a bookshelf. It's a very rudimentary alphabetizing system. And it is probably fine for 5% of orders. It's probably not fine for 50% of your revenue, right? If you can imagine the volume going to 10x of what it is today, this little shelf is not going to cut it, right? The other thing I would say is exclusive delivery partnerships. I'm sure you've all read about Yum, my prior employer, investing in Grubhub, Starbucks announcing a partnership with Uber Eats. There's probably a lot of you out there who've done a dedicated partnership. The main thing from this, I think, is that you need to get some kind of operational efficiencies to make this worthwhile. So yes, it's great if you can feel like you got a deal on the fee that they're charging you. Yes, it's great if you feel like you now can advertise more fully or get your name up on the list on the app. But if you're not getting some kind of delivery operational benefit from these partnerships, you don't have a great partnership, right? So you either need their data flowing directly into your systems, or you need an agreed way that the drivers are going to come in and approach your restaurant, where they're going to park, how they're going to get the food, what they're going to do. Are they going to pour the drinks? Are you going to pour the drinks? What's happening? And if you haven't had that conversation with them, then you really don't have a partnership. You're just exclusive, right? This is my personal favorite one. The Starbucks close to my house has actually dedicated pickup labor associated with their mobile order ahead. So their mobile order ahead is so busy that little shelf that they put there at the pickup point actually isn't enough, right? Because a consumer has to come in and pick up 10 different drinks before they find theirs and put their dirty hands all over someone else's drink to read the label. And so this particular restaurant actually has a guy standing on the consumer side of the counter calling out names for the mobile order pickups. Now, this is probably not sustainable, I would argue. So I think we also alluded to this earlier today. Restaurants are starting to think about, okay, well, this seems like a big problem. Maybe technology can solve it. And the one on the top is Itza, which Waobao talked about earlier. The one on the bottom is Apex. I think these are great solutions. These are very early days, but what they do is hook together the information that you have coming from the order, from the consumer, with the actual pickup point. So the consumer or the driver knows where to go, knows that they're getting the right item, and is directed, and then it's live and updating as you go through the process. So once Audrielle picks up her order, they'll be able to have another order right behind it. All right, so what in particular do we do? So a lot of people talk about, okay, if this problem is going to be that big, maybe we should just move it out of the restaurant. And I would of course argue that that is a very good thing to do. I'm a little bit biased, but our goal is to move off-premise, right? So if the restaurant exists for an experience for the dine-in consumer to really make that consumer experience very thoughtful and fun and interesting, then all of this catering and delivery and takeout nonsense, you don't want it in the restaurant, right? And if it's going to be 10 times bigger than it is today, the best design in the world is probably not going to make it functional when you have such a different mode of consumer pickup going on, right? The two channels, consumer dine-in and mobile order ahead or digital delivery, are so different and have such different needs that to try to satisfy them out of the same building is pretty challenging. And I think today, when we all have the real estate footprint that we have, and the sales are 5% of total, you can probably make it work, right? You need to be thoughtful about how you do it. You can probably make it work. But over time, it's not going to make sense, right? The off-premise demand is going to be so high that starting to think about a dedicated back-of-house concept is the only way to solve this problem. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what these three different approaches are and why different people use them. People use a lot of words like ghost kitchen. We don't love that word because there are actually people working in the kitchen. You'll hear cloud kitchens, virtual restaurants, dark restaurants, commissaries, virtual, what are all these things? So I would say first category is dark restaurant. So a dark restaurant would be literally, you go find a restaurant that failed because they were in the wrong location, they're 2 blocks off, they've got decent parking, you build it out, and you do all your off-premise out of that location. There are a couple major brands who are experimenting with this approach. The trick with the dark restaurant is that your volumes have to be really high, because now you have all of the occupancy costs of a restaurant, all of the fixed labor costs of a restaurant, but you're missing that dine-in channel, right? All you have is delivery, catering, and takeout. So very few brands are capable of generating, at least at this point in history, enough demand to pay for all those fixed costs. That's, I think, why you see very few people doing it. The next model is a commissary model. This tends to work best for catering or to support existing stores. So you move a portion of the volume out of the restaurant in order to free it up for dining consumers. And this would be a very shared space, maybe where you book by the hour or the month, you get a station. This tends not to work for large brands, frankly, because they don't really love to share, right? You all have proprietary equipment, proprietary ingredients. You have proprietary operating processes, particularly with regards to technology and food safety, that the idea of sharing with a bunch of other people kind of makes you a little nervous, right? So the last one is virtual restaurant. This is what I think people often also call ghost kitchen, cloud kitchen. I call it a virtual restaurant because I come at it from a consumer direction. So yes, it is a back of house, and it's focused on the back of house. But it is consumer related because you have to have that consumer relationship virtually. In the rest of consumer products, there are a bunch of digitally native brands. So think of things like The Honest Company or Dollar Shave Club, Warby Parker, Bonobos, all of these things that have been invented in the last 10 years. These brands have relationships with their consumers solely online. They, everything from brand discovery through to ordering and fulfillment, returns, everything happens online. And these brands have really taken off. There's nothing like that that really exists in restaurants today. Sweetgreen might be the only exception or closest approximation to it. They have a very strong virtual relationship with their consumer. But I think over time this will become more and more common, so that not only will you have the back-of-house infrastructure that someone like a Kitchen United offers, but you'll have that consumer relationship online. And what that enables is really rapid innovation cycles. So can you imagine building a totally new brand, a totally new menu, putting it out there, testing it with consumers, seeing how it goes without ever investing in CapEx? That sounds pretty awesome. Without having to take a big write-off on the lease when it doesn't work. That sounds pretty awesome, right? In the meantime, you can take your existing brand and put it in a much more capital-efficient location. It is shared, so the difference between the dark restaurant and the virtual restaurant is that there might be 10, 20 restaurants all in one space, but you have your own dedicated space. So unlike the commissary model, you would have your own four walls, your own shelves, your own 3-comp sink, and be able to feel that you can protect your recipes, your processes, your food safety from the other brands operating around you. So I realize this is absolutely a future thing, right? And I felt a little bit while I was listening to Nathaniel from Sweetgreen talk. Dana and I were saying we felt like we were listening to Buddha, that he was speaking to us from another plane. And I'm a little worried I'm doing that to you all as well, because this is absolutely way out there, right? So Cloud Kitchens, I think, has 1 location open. We have 2 locations open. We both have plans announced to build very rapidly, but it's very, very new. And while it's extremely common in Asia and the Middle East and Europe, starting to be, it's not here. But I do believe it absolutely will be. When we think of the problems of a restaurant in terms of, gosh, it costs so much to build a building, or how do I get it remodeled once that footprint is already there, the idea that you could just change the brand online, that's almost free compared to having to go and do a remodel of an old building, right? It's so different from where we are today in the restaurant industry. But I think that is definitely where we're headed. I think it is the only way to handle the off-premise demand that's coming. And I absolutely believe that off-premise demand will come. Thanks.